Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I am going to pause as we welcome everyone into the webinar today. Welcome. My name is Noemi Guevara, and I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement at California State University, Long Beach. Thank you for joining us for our next edition of our 49er Industry Chat. Before we start, I would like to let you know this session is being recorded and it will live on our website at csulb.edu/alumni. We also would like to encourage you to use our Q&A box located above or below your screen to submit any questions for our guest speaker today. And now it's my honor to introduce our moderator for the chat today. Cynthia Magana, using she and they pronouns, is a queer Latinx social worker. She is a therapist, facilitator, and life coach virtually in California and New York. She is the Associate Director of Social Work at Co-op Careers. Co-op's mission is to support recent college graduates to overcome underemployment through digital skills and peer connections. Currently, Cynthia provides therapy to recent college graduates navigating life and career transitions. Previously, Cynthia has worked in diverse settings across California and New York. Cynthia's interest is enhancing the well-being and mental health of young professionals of color, queer identities, and intercultural, immigrant, and intersectional identities. Cynthia is an alum, California State University, Long Beach, graduating with a degree in psychology in 2014 and earning her master's at New York University Silver School of Social Work. Thank you, Cynthia, so much for moderating the chat today. And now I turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Noemi. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Shauntina Sorrells. Dr. Sorrells is the Chief Program Officer at the Orangewood Foundation, a transitional youth servicing organization in Orange County. Dr. Sorrells completed her doctorate in social work at USC, holds a master's degree in social work from Cal State Long Beach, and has obtained her bachelor's in psychology from Vanguard University. Dr. Sorrells is a professor at Vanguard in Walla University. She works with families, youth in foster care, individuals in crisis, and organizations seeking innovation and change. Her experience is in programs that provide community-based programming to change the social norms that challenge systemic issues facing underserved populations. Dr. Sorrells is certified in trauma-informed caring and has trained trauma-informed practices from the OC Probation Department, OC Juvenile Court, and Public Defender's Office. Dr. Sorrells is an avid planner, crafting junkie, and loves spending time hiking, camping, traveling, and enjoying the beach. Please welcome today's 49er Industry Chat with Dr. Shauntina Sorrells.
Hello, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Hi, Dr. Sorrells. Nice to meet you and be in space with you.
Definitely a pleasure to meet you. And it sounds like we have similar paths, starting in psychology and then going off into social work, but that's really exciting. I'm excited to talk to you about social work today.
I know, we get to jam out on all things social work.
It's very exciting.
Yeah, so would you like to get started?
Sure. I mean, I can definitely start with my, true passion is macro social work. And I know even just saying that word sometimes in the social work field, people start to shudder. And that's my experience, definitely personally, and coming into the field. I really didn't understand what macro social work was when I graduated with my BA. And I really didn't understand the scope of social work and just how broad our field is and the things that we can impact and the things that we can do. And so coming in, I really was very open into where social work would take me. Having been a youth growing up in foster care, I spent 13 years of my life in foster care. And I just thought social workers were people who worked for the county, and that was really all that I knew. And obviously, now we know so much more, that there are so many. And I love the fact that when I heard what you did, what you do currently, to me, social work is so big and it's so broad, and we have so many opportunities, but we can't be afraid of that macro word. And macro doesn't just mean like government and policy, it means so many other things. And I think what you're doing and what I am building and trying to do too are examples of those. And I can't wait for more students, recent grads, MSWs to hear this and hopefully think maybe they could be a part of changing some of these systemic issues at the micro, meso, and macro levels.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sorrells. And you bring up a beautiful point, because I'm really curious, you know, one, with your life journey and narrative that brought you to social work, but in California, it's so common for folks to pursue their MFT. So I'm really curious for you, what was your determining factor for choosing social work? And also, did you know you wanted to pursue macro social work?
That's a fantastic question. I'm going to try and keep it to a super short answer. I was actually in high school when my social worker said to me, well, did you know there's like Title IV funding, and you could go to school and like have it be paid for if you go for this Title IV funding. And it just basically means you have to be a social worker. And I looked her in the face and said, I absolutely do not want to be a social worker. Like, it was like, absolutely not. And at this point in my life in high school, I'd taken a psychology course. I'd started like peer counseling groups on campus. In my high school, I'd done a lot of things where it was more geared towards the counseling and psychology field. And so I entered into my BA in psych, never changed majors, never knew anything. It was just like, this is what I'm going to do. By the time I finished my psych degree and I'd gotten accepted into a clinical psych program, I really said, that is not what I want to do at all. And I'd had some opportunities. I'd worked at a group home during that time. I'd done some, I did crisis counseling in a Hollywood homeless youth ministry. Like, I'd done all kinds of things outside of that world, and realized like it wasn't what I do, but I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And so it actually took me moving to Maryland with one of my friends from college. We moved to Maryland, and I started working at a program in a mental health agency that was a pilot program. It had never been done before. It was a respite program for youth with mental health diagnoses. And my supervisor is an MSW, and she was an East Coast MSW, which I feel like there's different connotation there to your point. And she was like, MSW is designing programs, creating solutions, and I was like, what? And she was like, it's this whole other avenue of social work, and I had just never really heard it. And so I was like, well, then I want to do that. Like, that's what I want to do. This is what I want to do. And so I wound up moving back to California and enrolling in Cal State Long Beach, go Beach, which I do every time, but very excited. And what drew me to Long Beach was the diversity, the understanding of diversity, the realization of like their professors were people. A lot of the professors were people who looked like me. I needed to go to a school where I could feel represented and feel heard and feel seen. And that was something that was super important to me. And so that's why I chose Long Beach and where I went, not to mention their track record for being a quality school of social work and just the people who came out of there. And so that's really why I decided to go. And I, from the very first day, was pretty adamant, like, I want to do macro. And I was very alone in that amongst all my peers who was very clinical focused. And I didn't really understand MFT at the time. And I'm getting to my even that point in that story. But I went in and I asked for a macro internship, basically like both years of my MSW, which is not typical and unheard of. And I also went in CalSWEC. And so I ended up working for the county 1 year in one of my internships, and they allowed me to design a program. So I got macro out of it. And then I also went to another agency that was clinical based, but I designed something there. So I got to do macro without even knowing it, and which was fantastic. And immediately after I graduated, one of my professors from my BA hired me as a professor at Chicago School of Professional Psych to teach in the MFT program. And I think this is just hilarious and full circle, because after my, all of my psych underpinning to come to this, and I started teaching in the MFT program, and I saw so many students in the MFT programs who were great social workers, but they just saw the MFT track and they really thought that was the way to go. And that was what they chose. And not that that choice was bad, but I really just helped expand. And so I taught their community psych class and adolescent, because that's what I mainly focus in. For over 12 years, I taught in an MFT program as a social worker, which I think is really funny. But then also I just see the overlaps in so many different ways. But even when I taught those classes, I talked to my MFT students about still being a part of the systemic change, still being a part of the bigger picture. If you want to help your clients, you have to understand the forces around them. You have to understand the environment and the things stacked against them, because when they leave that 55-minute session and they leave your office, they're going into the world. And if you don't understand that world and how it intersects with them and how it works against them sometimes or with them, then you can't truly help that client. And so that's a lot of where I built that work around. But you're right, in California, we kind of have a choice, MFT or MSW. And depending on what people want to do, when I counsel folks thinking about their master's, I say, do you know you want to do clinical for the rest of your life? Do you absolutely know, and there's no other option for you? And if they say yes, then I say, then an MFT is a great choice for you. And if they're like, I don't know what I want, I say, then an MSW is a great choice for you, because the options are endless. And so I think that's really the difference I see. And I think a lot of people don't get that counseling or advice, unfortunately. And so they may end up in a program that's not the best fit for them. But I think an MSW gives you almost all of the options possible. So I'm always leaning over there. I'm a little biased.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sorrells. Seriously, I feel like we've crossed paths, but like we probably like intercoastally may have navigated both East and West Coast. So I love that one of our meeting points is at Cal State Long Beach. And one of the questions in the chat is, how did you find yourself at Cal State Long Beach? Did you have any mentors in the field that may have guided you towards your MSW? And I recall that you were sharing that in the East Coast, one of the social workers supported you in navigating that. You know, similarly, while I was at Cal State Long Beach, my psychology professor, Dr. Courtney Ahrens, was definitely such a strong mentor in being a proponent towards pursuing my master's in social work because of that very specific question. There's multiple dynamics that a social worker can have and create, like system designing like you. Well, I'm curious, you know, like how did you find yourself at CSULB, and what was that experience like during your years in your master's program?
Sure. So I am authentically honest. And to be honest, at that point in time when I enrolled in school, it was 2006, I think, when I applied, 2007 when I started the program. And I was just like, I don't want to take the GREs. So I was looking for any program that did not require the GREs. And of course, CSULB popped up on that list at that point in time. So that was one of my first deciding factors. My second deciding factor was a school that really understood, respected, and was aware of diversity. I think going to an undergrad that was predominantly white, I think I was one of like 20 people who were African American on my campus. And that definitely was different. It was a different experience for me after growing up in San Francisco and super diversity, to coming to SoCal and being kind of culture shocked about like how segregated some places are down here and the differences. It was really challenging. And so I wanted a school that I knew very specifically would really be looking through that DEI lens and really be thoughtful about it. And Cal State Long Beach was ranked like one of the most diverse schools in the entire country. And then, like I said, I looked at the professors. I wanted to see people who looked like me, who were going to be teaching me, because I wanted to understand, did they understand my experiences? Did they understand what I had been through? If they're going to be teaching me about theory, and we know that most of our theories are written by people who do not look like me, then I needed to know they were going to help me figure out how to navigate that world as a person of color, as a person with lived experience. That was really important to me.
Yes, definitely echoing everything that you are saying, and the reasons why choosing Cal State Long Beach was important, and just really acknowledging the diversity that Cal State Long Beach does have. And I kind of want to weave into, you know, your career path after graduating, and how were you able to craft and design and build out programs in already well-established nonprofits?
Yeah. It's a great question. So during my master's program, we had the capstone. I think it's called the capstone class now. And back then it was called a little bit something different, but it was a macro class basically of like designing something. And you had to partner with a current agency and you had to help them come up with something. You had to implement it, and then you wrote a report on it and presented on it. And that class like sealed it for me. I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, this is it. And as I mentioned, I had taken those things and even applied them in my internships. And so I took exactly what we learned in that class. I applied it in my internship. So by the time I even graduated, I had 3 examples or opportunities of creating something and implementing it. And so immediately I was hired into a organization that had a new grant, a OJJDP grant, where they were working with youth who were placed out of home on probation and trying to get them home, reunification, which hadn't really been done in probation before. It had been done in foster care time, but the probation youth were kind of left over there. You're out. Okay, you're done. Go back to your community. And so it was a new pilot program. And so with my experience, both educationally of those 3, and then that pilot experience I had on the East Coast, I jumped at it and I went and I started building with that program. And so that program was very successful and did a very good job in helping some of that. Unfortunately, the funding ended. And then I was asked in that organization to take on another role, creating a new element and program. And so I went from direct service, creating a program, to then I was a supervisor creating a program. And when that was successful, and then I got offered a program director position that was a brand new program using MHSA dollars, or the millionaire tax, as we like to call it back in the days, creating brand new mental health programs for families with children with a behavioral health disorder. And I had to serve 1,200 parents in 1 year. And this had never been done before. And so you want to talk about designing while you're building the plane while you're flying it. And so like figuring it out. And that was a real test. But hiring 22 staff, getting off the ground and serving 1,500 parents that first year. And so really just honed my skills of program design. And after I did that, I was promoted again to a director, which I ran over all of our programs, and I took all of our programs. And that's when I became the trauma-informed kind of liaison for Orange County and training the judges and probation department and bringing that to the forefront in the work we were doing in Orange County back in 2012. And from there, I was actually hired in a national office doing fidelity consulting. So I would travel the country. So yes, in social work, you can have a traveling job. And I traveled the country and would go to different sites and check on their program implementation, fidelity, and design. I learned a ton and it was fascinating. And I did that for about 3 or 4 years and then really wanted to come home and do something locally. And so I transitioned to Orangewood Foundation. And even in Orangewood Foundation, I came in and my joke when I got here, I had 53 program staff, and I said there was 53 different Orangewoods. They were all just kind of doing their own thing. And so I started from the beginning, which is a community needs assessment. And so I started working with our teams and our youth to really figure out what the need, where the service is meeting them, where the service is really connecting with what the youth wanted. And then we built logic models. We chose assessments. We built an entire database. And so now all of our programs are operationalized and implemented at a high degree. We look at data, we look at functionality, and we are getting really high results and satisfaction from the youth that we serve.
That is so awesome. I'm like fangirling right now. Yeah, I think, and it's so interesting because with folks who may not necessarily have an idea of what macro social work is, it sounds like there's so much intentionality and so much heart in crafting the program design. And I'm wondering, because of your social work degree, what is that secret sauce that continues to drive the leadership and the intentionality and the strategic planning that you bring in as a social worker, especially now as a director, supervisor, now chief program officer?
That's a fantastic question. I think a lot of it is, the youth. The youth that I work with every day, and I make it a purpose to spend time with our youth. So I am finding opportunities to sit and chat with them, to talk with them, to get their perspective. I bring a macro MSW intern from Cal State Long Beach on every year, and work with them, and they do a community needs assessment. So we get a lot of youth voice. I often talk about, I have my one experience. I spent 13 years in foster care. So I could probably tell you what it's like to be in foster care. Yes. But that is one experience. And I cannot assume that my experience is everyone's experience. And so while I have this springboard of understanding, I have to make sure that I understand their voice more than ever. And if I want to be the person who, steps into a life like mine, I have to take their voice and say, well, what can we do better? What can we change and what can we do? And I really do believe that they are the ones with the answers. I don't even believe myself, having experienced that at one point in my life, am the one with the answers. So I really see that it's for us, by us. And so really taking the voice of those who are impacted, bringing them to light, talking with them, speaking with them, and helping them see all of the different components, and then working with them through the decision-making process and really helping them drive the behavior of our programs. I think that's what keeps me going every day and helps me show up every day. On the flip side of it, the hardest transition you ever make is working direct care to being a supervisor. It's the hardest one because you're leaving the youth, is what it feels like, or the ones you work with the client. And for me, I think you take that, but then your staff really do become people who you're coaching, shaping, and building. I always tell myself, my goal as a leader is to make you a better leader than me. If you surpass me, you do better than me, then I've done my job. So my job is not to gatekeep, but my job is to sit here and create opportunities for you to grow and for you to shine, whether that's in my organization or outside of my organization. And that should be social work, right? Like, I'm not going to just build you up to stay here. I'm going to build you up to go out and do wonderful, awesome, amazing, terrible changes in the world. That's good leadership. And so I'm always focused on, okay, how can we make things better for our youth? And one of the key ways is making things better for our staff and ensuring that our staff have a voice and our staff have input and our staff are creating the dynamics. I didn't write any one of our logic models at our organization. Each of our programs, their entire staff, I walked them through the process. I gave them the definitions. I helped them understand why. They wrote it. When there's something coming up in the data that doesn't seem to be going right, we go back and we say, okay, what's happening? What's the challenge? What's the barrier? What do you need? How could we make this better? I don't sit in an ivory tower and I'm like, well, this, right? I don't believe that's true leadership, but I also don't believe that's social work leadership. And then the other piece of it is I have a team, and my team is a very diverse, wonderful, experienced team of leaders. We just finished a leadership series. And so we just dug in and did 8 weeks of dedication to building them as leaders. The other pieces I advocate for my team, our organization offers absolutely free, no questions asked therapy. You don't have to go through your mental health insurance. You're not vetting a therapist. You're not doing any of that. We have vetted trauma-informed therapists on standby for anyone who works in our organization. And I believe if we're going to be a trauma-informed organization, then we have to show up for our staff. And so I think all of those are components and part of leadership and leadership in social work.
That's so awesome. Thank you. And yeah, really appreciate, like how to disrupt, like systems of white supremacy in the workplace and institutionalized oppression and how institutions are built. And I'm glad that you were able to bring in the social work value and ethic and being really client-centered, especially when it comes to assessments. Thank you. There is a question in the chat that's related to trauma-informed care, and it says, you're certified in trauma-informed care training. Can you please share a little bit more on this and its importance?
Absolutely. So there are various different ways, and there's various models of trauma-informed care. And so it all depends. I went through National Child Traumatic Stress Network, or NCTSN is what most folks call it. And that's based out of a partnership between SAMHSA and UCLA. But they really created a lot of materials, and it was actually free to get certified at that point in time, and I believe it still is. But there are many different modalities. If you're a therapist, you can do TF, CBT. There's trauma-focused cognitive behavioral. there's EMDR, there's all different types of ways if you want to say trauma-informed certification. So one point is that, right? Depending on your role and where you're at and what you're doing, finding a certification that fits your skill set and what you're doing is important. But the importance is in the bigger picture. So to me, there's trauma-informed care, and that means I'm going to treat you with empathy. I'm going to treat you with kindness. I'm going to listen to your voice and choice. I'm going to ensure that you're empowered, not enabled. There's 5 principles of trauma-informed that kind of all models subscribe to, and so that's what I'm rattling off, but that those principles exist and are there. But beyond that, and this is kind of what I was saying in the last question, is trauma-informed is not just how I treat the person right in front of me. It's how I treat the work. It's how I really embed it. So our finance department gets trained in trauma-informed care. Because why? Because the way that they issue our checks actually matters, right? Because when they think about our systems, how they interact with our clients or youth or interface, or how they interact with each other is important, right? We know that money is one that many of us already have like feelings around and thoughts around and triggers around. And so if we're not aware and ensuring our finance department isn't skilled in trauma informed, then when a mistake happens on a check and a staff person is desperate, right? Because something happened and this hasn't happened, but just let's pretend and thank goodness. But if something were to happen, how do we treat that person with trauma informed care, right? Of what could be happening? Well, if I'm just thinking in my own mindset, it may be like, well, we could just get it this, we could just do that. But like the urgency and the need to hear that person and see them is trauma-informed care. Our development department went through trauma-informed care. So when they're fundraising, we have shifted our whole organization to ethical storytelling. What is that? That means really ensuring that the stories we're telling they were broken, we came in and saved them, and now they're all better. They had an issue in their life, they chose to seek help, they took the help, they applied the help, and they have been their own hero through this journey. And that in a nonprofit world is unheard of. It's always about how we fix them so you can give us your money. And so that is not what we're doing as an organization. And so it has shifted all of our practices organizationally to be trauma informed. So it's not just about that one person in front of you, but how we all interact and how our policies and procedures, how the work that we do is shaped through that lens of being trauma informed throughout.
Definitely. Thank you. Yeah, it's so important. I really love what you shared about ethical storytelling. It's so common for folks in nonprofits or just mental health foundations, mental health communities, where sometimes we might see that we fix the problem, we provide the solution. So just like really echoing your leadership, social work values, dismantling systems, and, really seeing the importance of macro. I want to take a pause. Do you have any questions, or can we continue to keep asking questions that are coming through in the chat?
We can definitely keep asking questions that are coming through in the chat. And yeah, I am fascinated about your work. So if we have time, I would love to hear more about how you see your work in the macro sphere as well.
Yeah, definitely. So at Co-op Careers, we are a nonprofit. We support recent college graduates overcoming underemployment. And what that looks like is a person who identifies as a first in their family to go to college. They have received some sort of financial aid. And what we do is we provide a 17-week apprenticeship. So when we're talking about ethical storytelling, they're choosing to make these choices. They're choosing to build on generational wealth. And if we're talking about gatekeeping, the tech industry is a complete gatekeeped industry that really prevents people of color from entering into positions or entering into the sphere. So what Co-op does is we partner with tech organizations like Microsoft, Google, agencies in New York, agencies in Chicago, agencies in the Bay, and in LA. We really support building peer-to-peer networking, because when we talk about industry chats, it's not what you know, but who you know is who
Yeah.
can be that ticket into the door. And that is the referral process, the partnership process. My supervisor created the social work department, and in California, I have been able to really, very macroly, also be a stakeholder in building what does social work look like. And part of the foundation for me as a social worker and being ethical storytelling is like, we're not here to fix anyone, but we're really here to illuminate the light of, you know, how people navigate career transitions, how first generation folks want to, you know, fulfill their own dreams and build on generational wealth, since there is wealth disparities. It's a known fact. And it was really important for me to build out curriculum, you know, and one of the important workshops that I teach our interns, I built the social work department in California and built out the internship building. We also partner with Cal State Long Beach. We talk about the 4 eyes of oppression. You know, we have a whole storytelling series about unpacking various forms of oppression that start from the ideological, institutional, interpersonal, and then these internalized beliefs. We also offer a free year's worth of counseling to people who go through our program that are completely free, that we are really trauma informed, that really provide all the support. So that is just a piece of what we do at Co-op.
It's amazing. One of my launches, one of the programs I've created was a workforce program. And so working with our youth, and one of the things I built in with a student from Cal State Long Beach, Huspa Ahmad, great job. Huspa was my macro intern, and we designed this workforce program. And what we built in was that any company who comes to us and they're going to hire our youth, we're like, yay, that's great. But also the company gets training. So we do trauma-informed training for the entire corporation, has to get a trauma-informed training. Then the department that the youth is going to work in gets like a level 2 trauma-informed training, and the supervisor gets trauma-informed training in depth for supervising someone. And it's not about them working with broken youth or something like that, but really focused on the culture of a corporation. And how many corporations do we know that are not trauma-informed and are not good places to work in general? And we know that most people have trauma. So the reality is, and the feedback we're getting from these corporations is this is changing their entire workforce, not just for our youth. And it is something that has to be on both sides, right? It's not about, oh, we're so grateful that you hired our broken youth. Like, that is not it at all. But it really is that we're preparing our youth to work in the workforce, but we're preparing the workforce to be good places to work. And that matters just as much.
Definitely. Also teaching people how to be a supervisor.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Being a people person, and I'm so glad. So this also kind of piggybacks on the conversation around just like why macro social work, why this discipline. And the question is, how has social work and social services evolved in the last few years during the pandemic, with added pressure on mental health needs, in addition to what feels like an economic recession?
Right. So I can't speak for all of social services, and I know the difficult part with that, in California, we have 58 counties, so we have 58 social services. And then you have state to state, it's different across the country. So I think it is very different. I feel like in California, we have an interesting era right now, our environmental. We have our state government that is actually pretty able to like make decisions that are best for the people, I feel. And so I feel like some of those things that may affect other parts of the country aren't exacerbated so much in California. But then I think county to county, like Orange County is a very interesting place. It sits in between LA County and San Diego County, two of our most innovative, evolved, but large systems of social services and child welfare and different things. And Orange County is this super conservative bubble, kind of in the middle, that's super odd. Like, to give an example, Orange County is only 1.2% African American. But yet, if you go right across the border into Long Beach, that is a very different dynamic. You go to Riverside, you go to anywhere, and there's very clear reasons why that is in Orange County. So I feel like I can only speak to Orange County because I work here and I live here, because I believe I have to take up space here because it's required right now. But I do believe here I've seen organizations evolve. I don't know necessarily. I've seen a lot of more governmental systems now have reverted now that we're post-COVID, even though I think most of us know we're not. And so I've seen a lot of reversions in some way, shape, or forms with some. But I will say, because I just joined our Continuum Care Board, I am chairing our TAY homelessness committee. And so I am seeing like we're back to in-person meetings, which actually unfortunately limits how many people who can actually show up and who can be there and provide voice or public comment and shaping. And that has been difficulty. But then we're also creating a space where this is the first time there's a TAY representative on the committee. We also are having a lived experience committee with a TAY person. We also are ensuring we're creating a youth action board. So there's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back type of mentality is what I would say. And I think that's in general government and social services. I feel like there's been a lot more access because of virtual platforms like this, and we're able to do a whole lot more, especially on mental health services and whatnot. But then we also know that I think some services who really need to be in person aren't getting that in-person service that they really need. So I really do see that there's still a tug. There's still a unfortunate imbalance in a lot of ways. I think a lot of organizations may have been impacted funding wise and different things. And so while our staff need to be paid more in a bunch of different ways, but their funding's gone down. So how does that work? I have seen a lot of foundations, private foundations who give grants have changed their funding because of the pandemic. So they may have had these focus areas and now they're over here. And that is very difficult for a nonprofit to navigate if they were reliant upon those kind of steady sources of income to shift. And so I think that can be challenging. But then on the other hand, California did a good job of using our federal funding and state funding. So there was a lot of CARES Act and a lot of funding that came through. So a lot of agencies really, really boomed and we're having tons of funding, but that's all ending now. And so that's all dropping off of a cliff right when we are experiencing massive inflation and ridiculous price increases on food and basic needs. And so I don't know, I don't have the answer, and I don't know that things have evolved perfectly, but I think we're still in the midst of it. And I think everything is being figured out in the middle of it, which is always difficult.
Definitely. And, like this isn't a siloed experience. It's happening across state lines and kind of like East to West Coast, Midwest, and how government is being impacted, how funding is being impacted, navigating, quote unquote, post-COVID and the return to office. Yet there has been, a big push towards receiving mental health care and that access. So it's like us as providers, there is demand, but then when it comes to being compensated for that, that is the delicate dance that all folks are going to navigate, especially in the mental health field.
Absolutely. And I think, the reality, and I think as social work, we recognize that our clinicians went through a tragedy and a pandemic and a very tumultuous time too. So making sure they're getting the services and help that they need because of the demand being so high and the complexity of what people are going through right now, whether being home in a more traumatic situation than they wouldn't have been, right? They didn't have the escape of being on a campus, or they didn't have the escape of being able to be away from some things, or financially not being able to do those things. It has been extremely difficult. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. The next question that we have for you is, what does your role look like at Orangewood Foundation? What does the day-to-day look like? And then the leadership that you provide for your team?
Sure. So there is no 2 days that look the same. I'm very honest. So every day is very different. I would say, in the chief program officer, the role really is what you make it. But my my job is we have about 15 different programs that we operate out of Orangewood, and my job is to ensure that all of those programs are run effectively. And what that really means to me is that my staff have the support, have the resources, have the skills, and have the knowledge. So some days I'm leading a training. So I might be leading a motivational interviewing training or a trauma-informed care training for all of our staff. Some days I may be down in the trenches working on the ground with our staff, making sure we're getting, pantry items out to our youth, taking care of things. Most days I'm in a lot of meetings is the reality of my job, meeting with the rest of our executive leadership team, meeting with our teams of folks, meeting with our funders, meeting out in the community with different partnerships. A lot of my days are thinking of ways to make things better and then strategizing and then working with my team to help them come up with that. So every day does look very different. I would say with my team, so my direct reports that work with me, I meet with them weekly. And in those meetings, we're really talking about what's working, what's not working, what can be better. What can I do to support them? I ask for feedback every single time I meet with my staff. They're probably tired of me after years, but they know it's coming. But the goal is that I'm always learning too. And so I do attend workshops and seminars. Like I always need to stay fresh. The other thing that I do that I love doing, because I'm kind of a nerd, but I also think is really important for a leader, is I read the research. So I'm still in the research. It's one of the reasons I teach, is because I'm constantly always getting new information, and a research informed practitioner in social work is uber important. Can't get stale. You got to keep going. So I get an article, I will take it, I will pick 3 to 4 highlights from it, and I send it out to my team, and I just kind of summarize it for them because they don't all have the time to read a ton of articles. And it's like my side hobby, so I just do it. But those are a lot of things that are important, but reports that come out specifically about our population. So I'm looking at, things that impact the transitional age youth, 18 to 24. So our homelessness, our, exiting foster care, trafficking, those are all things that are major things that are happening with the youth that we work with. And so those are things I'm always keeping a pulse on, and sharing and disseminating those findings is important. And then sharing it with colleagues. I do a lot of advocacy, so that doesn't always look like what I thought advocacy was, like when I did lobby days and I'm on the Capitol Hill with my signs. It doesn't always look like that, but a lot of times it looks like making a phone call and saying, hey, here's what I'm seeing on these, different things, and here's the 3 trends. And I really think if we did something different, we could have a better outcome. And then doing that to 5 different people, and then somehow going, oh, wow, we all thought the same. So a lot of it is doing advocacy in that way, which is very different than what I always imagined advocacy was, that I would have to be in some politician's office. But some days I am in politician's office as well. And sometimes they're in mine as well. So there's a balance in that, but a lot of advocacy is on the ground, working with different partners and helping everyone come on the same page, come up with an agreement, and moving forward and acting upon it.
Definitely echoing like the advocacy and the multiple ways people contribute to activism. And it's not necessarily being in front and center. It can be being maybe behind the scenes, being a co-conspirator, even being at a politician's office. So this leads us to the next question, and it's kind of like helping folks understand what like sociology is, how social work is really intertwined. But the question says, what disciplines were intertwined with the program you created in macro social work like sociology? So like, what are the disciplines that you bring in to create those programs? And how does sociology play into it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I am always talking about how in my doctorate program, there was MBAs in our doctorate program. And when you look at human-centered design, which has its pros and cons and flaws, but like justice design, even if you look at that and you really think about it, it started in the business world. And so I think when we think about how to work, and one of my mentors used to always say, nonprofit is a tax status, not a business plan. And so as nonprofits, and that's mostly where I work, I really do believe we have to have the mindset or understanding of the mindset of the business world, because if we operate like a business, it's more likely we can tailor our services to help people use our funding wisely, and we can also disseminate or replicate our services. So I think a lot of that is something that we can continue to grow. And so I think bringing in some of those business principles is important in our social work and what we do, especially in macro. And when you're talking about system disruption and innovation, you're going to require different fields. And so it all depends on what program you're designing. So I don't know which program. I've launched about 8 or 9 different programs, so I'm not sure which program you're talking about, but specifically for me, when I talk to my students coming in and they're doing a community needs assessment, businesses do community needs assessment, researchers do community needs assessment, anthropologists do community needs assessment. Like, that's across all fields. What they call it is a little bit different, right? But the reality is of going out and finding out from the people you want to serve, or you want to buy your product, or you want to learn about, you have to start there. And you have to listen to those folks, and you have to get them embedded in your process, and then bringing that together and really figure out what a solution is. I think that's when you also bring in a ton of different fields and disciplines and elements. So sociology, in my understanding, is the study of a group. Psychology is the study of an individual. Anthropology is the study of a culture. I believe all of those are always entwined, because you can't look at an individual without understanding their family system, without understanding their community, which is therefore entwined in their culture. And I believe all of those always come into play and interact. And anytime you're working, whether it's with an individual or on a community level, I think that's always in play. And then when you add those other disciplines and fields such as business and clinical and research, I think they all come into play just depending on what you're creating and what you're looking at in the moment. I work with 3 or 4 universities right now that are doing studies in the programs that we have and what's going on. So you definitely need all hands on deck.
Awesome. Thank you. And yes, really piggybacking, echoing, recapping the person and environment and how all elements of fields in our professions play into the space. And as we're wrapping up for time, before we kick it back to Noemi, or toss it, pass it, glide it over to Noemi, any final words of wisdom for the folks in the space and for the folks who will be viewing this later on why they should be interested in the field of social work and macro social work and all things?
I think the 2 main questions I get is, how do I get into macro? And if you listen to my journey, I started it by just doing the work, and then that expanded as I learned and grew. So I would definitely say, like, that's a pathway. Like, it may not be that you're going to find a job description that lists macro and does macro and you're just going to jump into macro. It may be that you take a role and you create a macro space within that role. And so I highly encourage that, because I don't even think most people who are posting jobs post them in a macro way. So that may not be what you're seeing. But I also say, if you can find a new program, if they're talking about a new program or an innovative program, that's a great way to jump into a macro world, even if it is direct care, like it's where I started, but it was in a brand new program. And so I got to learn, shape, and grow like in that program and hone my macro skills. So I'd say that's one of the major questions I get. And then the other question I get is, I'm clinical. Can I ever be macro? Because I really just don't see how I would make that jump. And I challenge people in this all the time. When you do clinical, you engage with a client, you assess a client, you basically come up with a treatment plan, and then you determine where to go and you adjust your strategy as you're ongoing. You do the exact same thing in macro and clinical and in a community work. You engage with the community, you assess the community, you come up with a plan, AKA intervention, and what you're going to do, and you adjust as you go. It's the same skills, I promise you, and I teach this all the time, but it's the same skills. It's just applied in a different way, but it is the skills. You already have the skills. The skills we learn at social workers go across the micro, meso, and macro fields. It's just thinking about them a little bit differently. So don't be afraid or intimidated. Macro is for you. And if you're frustrated about the way things are going, the policies in your organization, how people are being treated, what are we going to do in the world? What the world needs now is macro social workers. So let's go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Sorrells. I'm going to pass it over to Noemi.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you, Dr. Sorrells, for sharing your journey today and just really kind of letting us in that insight of what your everyday looks like for both you and Cynthia. Before we go, I would like to ask both of you if any of our students or alumni would like to reach out to you. Are you on LinkedIn where they could reach out to you, or would you prefer them emailing us and we could connect you to them if they have any questions?
I love LinkedIn. I'm actually great with that because I share a lot of things and post a lot of those articles I was talking about and things I'm learning. So LinkedIn is great. Please add me on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Cynthia, for you?
Also a fan of LinkedIn. Feel free to add me. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you again for your time. I can't wait to meet you one day in person on campus. And thank you both for sharing your journey and your experience. Thank you everyone for watching. Please follow us on social media to learn about our future chats and visit our website to learn about our future